Hey you, what's up? Oh, nothing much. I'm just reading British politician Enoch Powell's biography to write a paper for my government class. Apparently, his very chatty barber once asked him how he wants his haircut, and he replied, in silence. Hey, did you know that that joke is actually from the oldest joke book known to 21st century mankind? What? What do you mean? So, the oldest joke book in existence, Philogulus, actually tells that joke. Word for word? If you mean Greek word for English word, then yep. Wow. Would you like to see the book? Some of the jokes in there are definitely socially constructed and historically contingent. Yeah, sure. Okay, here, let me pull it up on your laptop. Alright. Heracles, you who were called the laughter lover, let us see what you have for us. An intellectual had been at a wedding reception. As he was leaving, he said, I pray that you two keep getting married so well. Oh my goodness, that is some Sheldon Cooper level of dark humor. Indeed, but we still find it funny, don't we? Yep, we do. An Abderite who was a eunuch had the misfortune to develop a hernia. I don't find that one very funny, I'm sorry. Don't worry, me neither. I mean, I get the irony, but I think they're being racist against whoever this Abderite fellow is, and they're being kind of mean to eunuchs as well. Yeah, have you noticed how all these are basically a form of othering? Yeah, the titles are like horny women, intellectuals, misogynistic men, although ironically all the jokes within that section are misogynistic as well. And Chimeans, Abderites, those are races, aren't they? Despite the fact that this joke book was written in the 3rd or 4th century AD, the same sort of people seem to be othered in society today. Even though we've progressed socially, humour seems to soften the blow of social backwardness or even social forwardness. It widens the breadth of what is socially acceptable. Babe, I agree with the second part of what you're saying, but you're totally assuming that people in the 3rd or 4th century were socially backward compared to us. Like, how are you even defining the social progress that you claim we have compared to them? But I totally agree that humour can be used as a method of expressing our non-conforming cultural opinions. Oh my goodness, that was a mouthful. It's easy to justify what we say by calling it a joke. You're definitely right about that. Yeah, that's true. I did make an assumption about social progress. What I mean to say, my main point is that humour then and now was used for the purpose of isolating out groups. That's true. Hey, I just remembered a group of people that were imprisoned for making jokes too ahead of their time, rather than backward in time. 200,000 people to be specific. What? During Stalin's reign in the Soviet Union. Life has become better! Life has become more joyful! Communist Party of the Soviet Union report, as quoted in Sarah Davies' book, Popular Opinion in Stalin's Russia. Terror, Propaganda, and Dissent, 1934 to 1941. Anecdotes about the Vozhdi may gradually blunt revolutionary vigilance if they are treated in a conciliatory manner. Behind an anecdote there may lurk a Menshevik, a Trotskyist, a class enemy. Well, that was creepy. Stalin proposes optimism but bans humor? Makes you think of Doublethink from George Orwell's 1984, doesn't it? Exactly what I was thinking. Does this optimism that is enforced on the people combine with a ban on laughter and satire? People have to be happy but cannot be, well, happy. Thank you, dear Stalin, for our happy childhood. 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 Thank you, dear Stalin, for our happy. So yeah, there's a difference between optimism and laughter. The Soviet people were forced to be optimistic, as evidenced by the famous quote we just heard, uttered by school children during that era. But true laughter is quite different from this forced optimism. An excerpt from the joke by Milan Kundera, a Czechoslovakian novelist who was kicked out by the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia. He writes on humor in the context of Soviet domination. This particular scene is when the protagonist Ludwig is interrogated for joking that optimism is the opium of the people. Did she mention that a healthy atmosphere prevailed? Yes, I said. I think she said something like that. Did she mention that she was discovering the power of optimism? Yes, I said. And what do you think of optimism? They asked. Optimism? I asked. Why, nothing special. Do you consider yourself an optimist? They went on. I do, I said, uneasily. I like a good time, a good laugh, I said, trying to lighten the tone of the interrogation. A nihilist likes a good laugh, said one of them. He laughs at people who suffer. A cynic likes a good laugh, he went on. So the protagonist is told, even forced to be optimistic, but condemned for liking laughter. Cultural studies and laughter scholar Mark Weeks argues in his paper Milan Kundera, A Modern History of Comedy Amid the Comedy of History, that this is because laughter was a form of temporary release from USSR social order, while optimism was the highest form of adherence. Optimism was intentional. It was a way of carefully following social norms, while laughter was spontaneous, a subversion of a repressive culture. In fact, Sigmund Freud addressed laughter as a type of release. The USSR forced optimism, but true laughter or freedom or release, whatever you want to call it, made them squirm. Release, that's an interesting word to use. I recall that George Orwell, bringing it up again, once said that every joke is a tiny revolution. Do you think that release can be equated with revolution? Alright, I think there is a difference between release and revolution, though. Thomas Hobbes says that they that are intent on great designs have not time to laugh. Hobbes's view of laughter seems to negate the possibility that laughter could provoke a revolution. Laughter seems anti-revolutionary even. I mean, if you're too busy laughing, you won't know what's going on. Laughter or release might even be the opposite of revolution. Okay. What are you saying? So laughter and humor cannot provoke revolution? Oh, but then Orwell would be wrong, and he never is. On the contrary, laughter and humor can provoke tiny revolutions, as Orwell says, but I want to make the distinction between a tiny revolution, which can coexist with the release that we were talking about, though I posit that true revolution cannot. There's a difference between tiny and true revolution. Okay, babe, you're losing me here. Oh my goodness. You say that tiny revolutions are not just tinier versions of true revolutions, that the tiny revolutions cannot build up to true revolution. So you say in the Soviet case, the anecdotes or jokes that they shared provoked tiny revolutions and releases from repression, but did not bring about any true change? Well, I'm a little uncomfortable saying that those tiny revolutions brought about no true change, as you term it. But you are right in saying that a true revolution cannot be a product of tiny revolutions induced by humor. Then what's the point of tiny revolutions? I was hoping you would say that. This is almost scripted. A Stalin-era historian, Ian Lachlan, provides the reason in his paper, Laughter in the Dark, Humor Under Stalin. The reason for tiny revolutions, that is. The intelligentsia had only two options. They could either sell their souls and devote themselves to the celebration of Soviet power in public, or they could sit on the sidelines and make fun of the whole charade in private. Those with integrity chose the latter path of glorious defeat. A Russian anecdote describing the Soviet experiment, as quoted in Ian Lachlan's paper, Laughter in the Dark, Humor Under Stalin. Stalin, Khrushchev, and Brezhnev are travelling along at high speed in the great locomotive of socialism, built by the dear departed engineer of human happiness, Lenin. Suddenly the train grinds to a halt. Stalin is the boss, so he decides to go investigate the cause of the delay. He enters the driver's cabin and sees the driver working on the engine. Aha, Stalin thinks, he's the wrecker. So the boss pulls out his revolver and shoots the driver in the back of the head. Stalin returns to the cabin and reassures his comrades that he has solved the problem and the train will be moving again soon. They wait a few minutes, the train does not move. Khrushchev decides to take the initiative. He too goes to the front of the train and there he finds that the driver, his tools scattered around him, has been shot dead whilst trying to fix the engine. Khrushchev returns to the cabin and points an accusing finger at Stalin. It's his fault. The train stopped because he shot the driver. If we all ignore Stalin, the train will start moving again. They sit in awkward silence for a while, but the train refuses to budge. Brezhnev doesn't like to see everyone fall out like this, so he volunteers to take the helm. He goes to the driver's cabin and sees that Khrushchev was right. Stalin's revolver lies on the floor, still smoking next to the dead engineer. He then has a look at the machinery, but quickly realizes he hasn't a clue how to fix it. So he returns to his fellow travelers, lowers the blinds, pulls out a bottle of vodka, pours everyone a drink, and says, "Let's just pretend we're moving, shall we?" So the only way of preserving their human rationality was via humor. As we see in this anecdote, the Soviet people managed to use humor to be political, while still avoiding that explicit anger and disappointment often existent in oppositional messages. It was also probably safer for them to use oral anecdotes like this one rather than oppose in writing. As Laughlin said in his article, no one ever really writes a joke, though everyone rewrites them, so you cannot arrest the author. You can't raid a house and seize a joke. You can't put it in prison or shoot it. It is compact. Jokes can be stored in abundance in one's head and easily dispersed. The tiny revolutions that we talked about were a revolution of the soul. In fact, Reagan's administration was heartened by Russian anecdotes because it showed that the people had not sold their souls to the facade of, to the Soviet facade. Laughlin said that the USSR was part of the timeless comedy of the wily slave compelled to serve the foolish master. Wow, that was quite a speech you made, but it made a lot of sense. So do you think this humor of the Soviets served no purpose other than preserving the integrity of the dominated citizens? Not that I'm diminishing the importance of that, but do you think it served any other purpose? That's a good question. Well, I'd argue that it had a nation-building role as well. People shared these jokes not just as a way of preserving individual identity, but of national identity. Sociologist Michelle Smirnova, who studies the cultural expression of power, very aptly says that anecdotes serve as a rich source of data about the collective identity of Soviet Russian men that differs in a number of ways from dominant Soviet state-defined political identity of Soviet citizens, so men and citizens. She also compares these anecdotes to Geertz's idea of cultural texts, saying that culture should be studied for its meaning and not for its effects on action. This seems to correspond directly to our comparison of tiny revolutions and what we term true revolutions. The tiny revolutions preserve culture, though they do not directly overthrow hegemonic powers in the form of true revolutions. Humour is used to disguise repressed truth and repressed hopes, for better or for worse. In free society, humour is often Mr. Hyde, revealing underlying stereotypes within our culture as in Philogelos. In repressed society, it provokes the laughter of the oppressed to preserve rationality and identity. Humour is an interruption in the flow of time, as cultural studies and laughter scholar Weeks said. Humour is existential. It shows both rude disrespect for tangible history while preserving true history and society of the people. Good day and good night, dear listeners, and laugh away your repressions. Kids, use some Russian anecdote as you endure those big bad bullies. Adults, laugh away your 40-hour capitalist work week. Sigmund Freud would be proud of you. I surely am. You're ridiculous, oh my goodness. I am simply applying humor as a release from the repression of being in your podcast. Sure.